Hello, thank you everyone for joining this talk today. Our subject is Collecting American Studio Craft and the Legacy of Objects USA, presented by R & Company and Design Miami. I'm Wava Carpenter of Design Miami. I'd like to give a big thank you to our illustrious panelists, whom I will introduce now. We have Evan Snyderman, co-founder of R & Company Gallery in New York, one of the most ambitious and influential design galleries out there today. We also have Abby Bangser in New York, the founder and creative director of the Object and Thing Fair. She is also one of the curators of Objects USA, along with Glenn Adamson, James Zamatis, and Evan Snyderman. Our third speaker is Meaghan Roddy, Senior Vice President and Senior International Specialist in Design at Phillips Auction House. She is in LA. She was notably one of the curators of the exhibition, The Good Making of Good Things, Craft Horizons Magazine, 1941 to 1979, which traveled to multiple museums between 2017 and 2019. Our talk today will begin with an overview of the Objects USA exhibition, followed by a conversation about the market for collectible craft in America, how it's evolved over time and which factors have impacted its trajectory. And we will end with a Q&A at the end, so please feel free to write your questions into the chat box. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Evan to begin telling us about the wonderful Objects USA exhibition.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Can everyone see that? Okay. Welcome, everyone, and thank you. This is a great talk and something that we're very excited to share with everyone. It's a subject matter that we have been passionately, promoting and building interest in for, I think, the entire life of our gallery. The idea of craft and design coming together. There's been a real synergy in the recent past, I think, where all of these things are starting to happen, where the fine arts and craft and design are all coming together, converging in an incredible way that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to give you first a quick overview of Objects USA, because it's an exhibition that does take some explaining. The original exhibition, which was organized by a man named Lee Nordness, and with the help of the curator, Paul Smith, who was then the head curator of the American Craft Museum, which is now the Mad Museum. Lee Nordness was a contemporary art dealer at the time with a gallery on Madison Avenue selling abstract expressionist paintings. Together, the two of them organized this very ambitious, which Wava, you mentioned that exhibition with over 300 artists working in traditional fields of craft, but in non-traditional ways. Lee Nordness was actually building a collection of fine art for the Johnson Wax Corporation and became interested in craft along the way. And in that, he decided that this would be a great opportunity because there was, at this time, we're talking, 1969 was when this original Objects USA exhibition was organized. It's unclear exactly how long it had been in the making, but obviously it had taken quite a bit of effort to organize all those artists together. And the Johnson Wax Foundation or company had commissioned him essentially to build this exhibition, sponsoring the entire show, producing the exhibition, which was opened first at the Smithsonian in DC, which is now the Racine Art Museum. And then it traveled to, sorry, not the Racine, the name of that museum, but right, sorry. The show traveled to 33 museums around the country. And then it went to Europe and then on to Japan. So one of the most influential shows of the time, clearly. And with our exhibition, we also felt it was important to include 50 of those original artists and pair them alongside 50 contemporary artists. This was, so 100 artists included in our contemporary version of Objects USA. And really with the intention to, again, show the world how this idea of the handmade object has kind of come full circle. I'm going to start to show you a few slides. So here you have an image of a work by Luam Malaki, the chair below, which is a contemporary work from 2020. And above that, Paul Huddleberg, a work from 1969, which was included, a similar work included in the original exhibition. What we wanted to do was we couldn't show the original works from that exhibition in 1969 because all those works actually were in the end donated to the institutions that this exhibition traveled to, primarily the American Craft Museum, getting the bulk of those donations, and the Racine at the other end, which is where the Johnson Wax Foundation is housed. So here's some images of that original exhibition on the left, the installation. And on the right, you have Paul Smith on the left, Mr. Wax, Samuel Wax, and then Lee Nordis on the right. So this exhibition, was with all of the objects included some of the most famous artists of the time, which is also something to really take note of, was the number of artists, but also it's interesting to see how many of the artists' careers after this show really exploded. And you had from the most famous artists of the time, people like Sheila Hicks, people like Wendell Castle, J.B. Blunk, Ron Nagel, Peter Volkus, and well-established artisans shown next to people that you'd never heard of. Now here you see a slide of our current exhibition. This is the show in the gallery now. And we similarly tried to share the space equally amongst those who were well-known and those who were not, to create this sort of idea of, a democratic exhibition plan. And the whole purpose of the show is in the end to break down the hierarchies of the difference between, the famous or the not famous, or the fine artist or the crafts artist. So I think that was really one of the great intentions of this exhibition, as well as showing a diversity of artisans. So in that original exhibition, they did a really great job of including artists of color, African-American artists, Japanese American, Chinese American, Indian American, even Native American artists, and a fairly equal balance between male and female artists, which at the time was fairly unheard of. In our contemporary show, of course, we tried to follow those same parameters. In this slide, you have Serban Ionescu on the left, Woody Deafeo with a small vessel on a blue stand on the right, Roberto Lugo all the way in the back, self-portrait, and Anders Ruwald, large ceramic sculpture pictured there. We're going to show just a few slides of some highlights from the show. Ka Kwang Hui was in the original exhibition. This is a work that's in the show from 1966. Kwa Kong Hui was an artist who was doing sort of pop art in ceramics at the time, not so well known, but his work is extraordinary. And unfortunately, there's not as much of it out there as I would love, but hopefully we'll find more in the future. And we like to show in the exhibition, you'll see, if you do get to visit the gallery, we paired him next to this artist, Jiha Moon, who's a contemporary artist out of Atlanta. And her work was, as you can see in these vessels, very influenced by Roy Lichtenstein. And Ka Kwang Hui actually was the ceramicist who made the ceramics for Roy Lichtenstein in the 1960s. So throughout the exhibition, there are these great stories that come out. And it's been really a pleasure to be able to kind of share those stories with people. One of my favorite pieces in the exhibition is a work by Lenore Tawney from 1962 called Peruvian Textile. And some of the artists in the exhibition, as you'll see, were clearly influenced by earlier movements. This piece has a lot of Bauhaus sort of influence. And there were several artists in the show. Maya Gratel, whose vessel in the exhibition is clearly influenced by the Bauhaus. But this is also done in an incredible textile. And this piece was on loan from the foundation and is available only for institutions to purchase. But in general, most of the exhibition, we tried to create works that could be made available for sale. About 20 or 30% of the show are loans. But that was another great part of the show, is being able to collaborate with so many different galleries and institutions and families and artisans directly. This is a work by Liz Collins, a contemporary textile artist, and it's called Frozen Textile. Incredible piece that's designed to be walked around. It floats in the middle of a space, and the colors are incredibly vibrant. You have to really see this piece in person. It's extraordinary. And Liz is someone who was a professor at RISD for several years, works in New York, Brooklyn artist. And I think, like a lot of the artists in the original exhibition and the artists in the contemporary exhibition, they were professors in general. So there's a lot of professors in the original show and in today's show, people who clearly have a large influence on students. And I like to think about this almost as if it's bigger than a trend, and it's more of a movement. It started in the 60s and it's continuing today. The idea of the handmade object. This is Richard Marcus. Again, another artist that I think most people in the design realm have really never heard of. But Richard Marcus was one of the most influential glassmakers of the 60s. He's still alive today. And in this slide, you see these two works are from 1967, 1968. Richard Marcus was given a Fulbright scholarship in 1967 that brought him to Murano, to the island of Murano. And he was the first person allowed inside the Vanini factory and to work on the Vanini floor. And what that did is it opened the doors to the entire world learning the Venetian techniques, which had been kept secret for hundreds of years, since Roman times. So in this slide, you see this work on the left, which is essentially a acid pill made in the shape of, in the design of a flag. And this piece really came to represent a lot of what the exhibition was about, the Objects USA, the idea of celebrating America for something that maybe that was the positive thing that happened here, which didn't happen in other cultures. The idea of the craft artist working as both the maker and the designer of the object. Something maybe we'll talk more about as we go further on. This is another work from Richard Marcus, which is extraordinary. This is made with Marini, which are the little tiny glass pieces that are made through cane and then reapplied to the surface. It's tiny. It's only about 3.5 inches tall, which you can't tell in this slide, but it's just an extraordinary jewel of a work from 1967. This was, in fact, the first work he made at Vanini, this particular piece. Another one of my favorites is Art Smith. Art Smith was a jeweler who had a studio in Greenwich Village through the 1940s, 50s, 60s. Has had a bit of a sort of renaissance in the last 10 years, I'd say. People like Mark McDonald have done a terrific job of getting people to know Art Smith's work. He had a big show at the Brooklyn Museum of Art several years ago. But I'm a huge fan of Art Smith's, and his work, is comparable to any of the great jewelers of the time. Like you can see a lot of Calder and Bertoia in his work, yet I think the work is still very, very attainable, which is something that people, it's an incredible body of work. I think on the left-hand side is this beautiful cuff, and on the right is what's called the Vogue, or the half necklace. Sorry, I think it's called the Vogue cuff, maybe, or the jazz cuff. But a lot of influence from jazz culture, from culture of that time, and just beautiful, beautiful work. And he was really an outspoken proponent of the African American artist, and took beautiful photographs of these gorgeous models wearing his jewelry. Another artist contemporary artist, Woody DeFeo, who is in the exhibition, from Oakland, California. I think Woody is someone that is a really important person working in ceramics today, someone who comes from the area where there was a group of artists in San Francisco called the Funk artists who were working in ceramics, people like Robert Arneson, Richard Shaw, Ron Nagel. Woody is kind of the contemporary coming out of that culture of this idea of sort of almost surrealist pop ceramics. I think Abby, who was the artist, one who brought Woody into the show, might want to say more about Woody, but he's a great influential person and a young artist who's doing great things.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Evan. Yeah, Woody's just 30 years old, and I think he's already made a tremendous impact in both this exhibition and the contemporary art world from sort of a wider perspective. He trained at California College of the Arts. So as Evan said, he was picking up on the funk artists that came before him and even some of the street artists like Barry McGee. And I think what's interesting when you look at his work, he's primarily working in ceramics, ceramic with glaze, some full room installations, but he's being received. He's one of these artists who are sort of between worlds in a way, where he had a show at Karma in New York in 2019. Jessica Silverman, a contemporary art gallery in San Francisco, represents him and consigned this work to the exhibition. So as we think about, I know this conversation is a sort of market and collecting conversation. This is an example of an artist who's certainly blurring those boundaries that we so often create.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, that many of the artists in this exhibition are exactly in this crossover between these two worlds, and a lot of that comes from what's happened over the last 10 years in terms of the market, starting really with Design Miami and opening the door to the contemporary art collector, understanding and being able to see design in a different way. And that trend is continuing, where these lines are constantly blurring, and you have ceramics artists showing in fine art galleries, and you have the vice versa. It's all sort of happening now, where those traditional boundaries are starting to break down. Something that we've all been very much involved in that process, which is exciting to see it really coming to fruition. Ruth Duckworth is another artist who has incredible influence. This work from 1970 is a large-scale porcelain wall sculpture. And Ruth, this piece is on loan from the foundation. Ruth's now represented by Salon 94. I think has an exhibition coming in the future of her work. This piece is from 1970, and again, very similar to the original work in that exhibition. So we were thrilled to have Ruth included in this exhibition as well. Another young artist, Katie Stout, who we represent here at Art and Company. This is one of her Fruit Lady sculptures. Again, Katie has taken the idea of design and turned it on its head, making traditional, functional objects, but in very non-traditional ways. This Fruit Lady is made entirely out of ceramics, and stands almost 6 feet tall. And Wendell Castle, who we can't give a talk without mentioning, because I do give him a lot of credit in being one of these early people who really made that transition. This work was one of 2 made in 1967 in fiberglass. One was in the original exhibition. The one in our show is the second one from that series. But Wendell was one of those people who didn't want to follow the rules, and was actually the first person who Lee Nordness showed that wasn't a painter. Lee Nordness met Wendell Castle, and that's what got him interested in this idea of showing craft alongside his artworks, and looking at craft artists who were doing these kind of more abstract expressionist things with other medium. J.B. Blunk, another hugely influential artist who has gotten a lot of great accolades in recent history, and also has made that transition, being shown at Blum and Poe and other fine art galleries. This work is an extraordinary, although it's essentially a stool, it's a really powerful work of sculpture. And I wish you could see the back side of it. The piece is completely a three-dimensional work. And here, I'll let Abby take over now, talking about Blunk.
Well, as Evan indicated, Blunk, again, being an artist, he passed away in 2002, but in 2010, Blum & Poe started representing the estate. And so seeing his work in a very different context in a contemporary art gallery has sort of changed the trajectory of where his work has been collected. And in recent years, he's been acquired widely by institutions, LACMA, certainly MAD has important works. And this is just, I love this installation shot. It's showing the range because so often he's really known probably first as a woodworker, but his training and his work in ceramics are also really important to his practice. In the 50s, he was in Japan and just sort of by chance met Noguchi. And through some recommendations Noguchi made, he actually trained and really apprenticed under master ceramicists and took that knowledge back with him for where he then worked after building his personal home and studio in Marin in Northern California. But this is an installation view of a ceramic show of Blunk's work just from 2019 at Kate McGarry, a very contemporary gallery in East London. So again, just sort of showing the different context for his work today.
Yeah, and another point too is see that this idea of a movement that happened here in the United States, this American studio movement, is starting to make its way to the rest of the world. It's not something that is uniquely American, but it's something that we really, I think, are just starting to understand the importance of it as a movement. And that's what hopefully this exhibition will help bring that, that forward.
Yeah, the exhibition's just doing an incredible job. And I have to say, I'm privileged to be here at the gallery today and just walked past Green River's chair here. And it is just extraordinary, the sort of scale of it and the materiality. But this is two artists actually make up Green River Project, Aaron Agela and Ben Bloomstein. And in 2017, they decided to form their practice, Green River Project LLC. They both come out of the art world and their training is as contemporary artists. Ben, for a long time, worked for the artist Robert Gober, and Aaron worked for Nate Lohman. And they had their own practices and then decided to make furniture. They really wanted to make functional things. Today, the practice is furniture and also entire interiors. But so they don't have the training in woodworking or metalwork. It's a conceptual practice. They come up with the idea and then execute from there. This chair, Evan and I were chatting, you probably want to wear certain things if sitting on it, but it's pretty awesome to see. And they have just everything is handmade. They show the kind of joinery, the nails are visible, all of that. And then they really are about that idea they're putting forward. I think next.
I love that about this chair. It has it's a large scale chair and it has the shape of sort of almost a traditional Art Deco kind of form, like a club chair, but then with this grass seat. And she mentioned that the joinery, it's actually just nailed together pieces of plywood. It's very raw. It has that, on purpose, like you meant to see that this is the way this is constructed. It's really a wonderful work.
These are just some other examples of Green River's work now that they've formed their practice, where they've kind of crossed over into other contexts. So this is actually from the first edition of Object and Thing in May of 2019 at 99 Scott, and they did a whole installation of outdoor furnishings. So I thought it gave you sort of a nice view of different types of pieces from them, and certainly here working in a range of woods. And they love that sort of process of discovery. Oh, here's a piece of black cherry wood. I want to figure out working with that. Here's a teak, and exploring it and seeing where the materials lead them. And I think we have one more installation view. This is what they've just done currently with us. At an exhibition at the home of Gerald Luss in Westchester, New York. And here they actually met with Gerald, and Gerald's living, he turns 95 in October, and he's most famous for designing the interiors of the Time Life building in 1959. So they were kind of referencing post-war New York design sensibility and decided to make an all aluminum collection. So typical of Green River, get the idea and then figure it out from there. So we've got this round piece and the chair. Both are entirely unique, as is the chair that's in the Art and Company exhibition. One more for me. This is Kiva Motnic, who is a really inspiring fiber artist. I hope you do get to see her work here in the show. She actually comes from a fashion background. For some time, she was creative director at Isaac Mizrahi. And she's also maintained a contemporary art practice with the artist Susan Ciancelo. She formed a collective called Run Home, where they work collaboratively with groups of other artists to make textile pieces, and also to teach dye making workshops and other kind of communal quilting activities. So she runs a studio called Thompson Street Studio that's here in Soho, and she also has a home in the Catskills. She's very, very focused on technique and material. So in this piece, as with her quilts, she brings together a sort of assemblage of materials that she collects in her travels and stitches together. You could kind of think of Japanese boro that way. And then also materials that she dyes. She's just an expert natural dyer. So she takes, marigold and sumac and onion skins, avocado pits, natural materials to make her own dyes. In this case, they're stretched and then stitched together with kind of invisible seams, everything perfectly aligned, and then is in a framed birch wooden frame here. So these works can function freestanding in a space, on a wall, or I have one install shot next of where we have a work to, oh, here's this, look how incredible that is with the light kind of going through it.
Right.
And
this is another installation view of the current exhibition, and you can see with her work, it really does transmit light. It's almost as if it's a window, which I found so fascinating.
Yeah, and just like Liz's, you can look all the way around it. But I think Evan's point about the light is very important and just magical with her work. And we have one more installation view of another piece she just made for Object and Thing, where it's in a window too. So you sort of see the light coming through, and in some ways operating almost as a fabric, stained glass.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say regarding the exhibition design, and I do hope that all of you can make it in to see the show if you haven't already. It's going to be up through the end, or after Labor Day, around September 15th, I think the show officially closes. We keep extending it because we keep getting more and more people coming, which is great news. And we really do hope to have maybe a closing event sometime in September where we could actually bring people back together. All of the artists who want to come and see the exhibition. But one of the great things I think made me most happy about the exhibition was being able to put pieces together to find a common language or thread throughout, be it the color or the form or the story behind the pieces. There throughout the show, there's a lot of discovery, and it was such one of my, I think, favorite exhibitions we've done at the gallery in the 20-something years we've been doing this. Jump ahead to Doyle Lane. Okay. Meaghan, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. And I cannot wait to see this show. Objects USA is one of my favorite topics, and any chance I have to evangelize craft to design and contemporary art markets, I'll take it. This is a Doyle Lane piece that I actually have coming up for auction next week, June 9th at Phillips. It's the first time that we are offering his work at Phillips, and I actually think it's the first time his work is being offered at a major New York City auction house. His market is interesting because it was largely localized in California among regional dealers and galleries, and I really have to credit Gerard O'Brien from Reform Gallery for really sort of getting his name out there and boosting his profile for decades. And recently, attention has been drawn to him through more contemporary shows, and also your show at R & Company right now. His work is on view. And then also at David Kordansky Gallery, there was an exhibition last summer that received quite a lot of press. This is curated by Ricky Swallow. And the piece that's coming for auction is actually from this exhibition. And this helped boost the profile. He had a great, Lane got a big article in the New York Times, which was excellent for him. And I think this sort of recent interest in his work is stemming from this revisiting of craft history and pulling out some of the other narratives that the canon hadn't really truly recognized until now. And Lane is a good example of an artist whose work was shown in Objects USA, but had sort of languished in the lower registers of the art market until more recently. So we're very excited to see how that performs next week. And our objective at auction, which is really the secondary market, with auction is just another part of the ecosystem of promoting craft. We're continuing the work that the galleries and museums and dealers have been doing. And craft is such a big area of the market that's full of opportunity. There's a lot of artists, as Evan was saying, that are ripe for rediscovery. It's a part of the market where women were really able to work. That's something that's interesting to me. And as we mine these new histories, which is happening all over the market and in the museums, we're seeing that there was a lot of space for women artists in craft. The price points, this is the perfect slide for this note, which is the price points can often be more approachable, not for this particular piece, but we're seeing there's a lot of work that's accessible within craft. There's a wealth of material. There's still discoveries being made of who these artists are. And the large collections of craft that have been amassed for decades still have not yet hit the market. So the work is still available. I included a couple of slides of works that are at the top end of the craft market. The Peter Volkus work in the previous slide is Black Belerius from 1958. And this is what we consider, I think, blue chip American craft. And this is, again, it's a prolific artist. Hundreds of works. This is he's someone who benefited from extensive exhibitions and publications covering his work. This is a monumental piece, exceptionally rare, and it just sold last December for 1.3 million. So this now stands at the top of the market for craft, really, on the secondary market. So this was an exceptional opportunity that we're thrilled to have. And then the next slide, these are two works by Wendell Castle, and I wanted to include these because these actually came from the personal collection of Lee Nordness, who was one of the organizers and curators of of Objects USA. And so they're both from 1967, and they're both what I would consider more blue chip Castle. This is, again, at the top end of craft for a prolific artist who also benefited from extensive exhibitions and publications. So this is what you're looking at is the top end of the craft market, which is very strong. And this is the body of work that is most desirable for him. And this is in the six-figure range. And then the next slide, this is the final slide for me. This is June Schwartz. And I wanted to include this because as we are talking about, sort of mining alternate histories for design and contemporary art, we're looking at different media also. So outside of ceramics and fiber and wood, which have made its way into the different marketplaces, we're looking at things like enamel. And enamel was its own category entirely in Objects USA. And so someone like June Schwartz, who again had sort of a more localized market, we were interested in offering her work at Phillips to introduce our audience to something of this nature in this material. And so introducing craft to our audience, which is made up of interior designers, design collectors, institutions, contemporary art collectors, there is an educational component. We do have to provide a fair amount of editorial content, whether it's in the catalog or on the website, just to sort of ease people into the idea of this and contextualizing these artists among their contemporary art peers. And so in the case of June Shorts, it's an example of a market that we are building. She's one of many artists that we're interested in promoting and boosting her profile at auction. This is a work that I think the estimate was $2,000 to $3,000 and it sold for $10,000. So I'm just using her as a loose example of how you can find interesting work, artists that are ripe for rediscovery, to be promoted to larger international audiences.
That's great. Thanks, Meaghan. Yeah, this is really, I like to think about the fact that there's so much more work to do. It's like we've only just scratched the surface. Even with Objects USA, the show we have up now, we have 50 of the original 300 artists. So there's a long ways to go. And it wasn't that we only selected the famous people, we selected people for various reasons. And I think one of the most rewarding parts of that exhibition, which I wanted to just mention, was the collaboration between the 4 curators, because that was really an important aspect of making this show what it was. Having Glenn Adamson obviously involved. Glenn is our powerhouse in the craft world and all knowledgeable on so many things. And but having his point of view, as well as Abby and James Amenas and myself, we brought 4 different perspectives to the curation of the show, which made it so dynamic. And I think important to think about not being one person's point of view or one idea, or focusing on what was important in the marketplace or important in the history books. But we've only just started. There's so much more work to do. I think this is our last slide. So I'll just note that this slide here, we have the work of Rogan Gregory, who's doing incredible work in plaster, the hanging work, and then on the wood piece on the bottom is by Dan Loomis Valenza, also still living. He was a really interesting artist working here in the state in I think it's New Hampshire, and studied under Wendell Castle, became a professor, teaching for many, many years. And then on the left is Tommy Simpson. This is a painted wood sculpture, which is one of my also highlights of the show, one of my favorites. It looks as if it's a surrealism work of art in 3 dimensions. It's an extraordinary piece. So I think that's it for slides. And I guess we can get back into questions.
Yeah, I have a few questions, but I'd also like to invite everyone, if you do have questions, please feel free to write them in the chat or the Q&A, and we can address them as a group. But I wanted to ask everyone if you could underscore a point that's sort of come up here in the conversation so far about the kind of hierarchy of the arts and where craft has been at different points from the mid-century to now, and how that affects the value that's placed on it. And do we still need craft to be seen as art to reach that value, or is that changing at all?
I'll start. I'll jump in. Craft has it's largely been offered in decorative arts and design auctions for decades. And so I think there was a siloing of craft as various craft media, sort of like a lesser media than painting and sculpture. And so a lot of work, I think, has been done within the last 10 years even to promote craft artists within design auctions. And then slowly, because we are seeing it turning up at Frieze Masters, at Art Basel, ceramic work, fiber work, things coming into the fine art marketplace, that sort of hierarchy has broken down a little bit, but it helps open the doors to contemporary art, the contemporary art market, which is where the money is, if I can say that. So it's been good, and we collaborate a lot at Phillips with the design department and the contemporary art department deciding what goes into which auction, where that artist is going to benefit the most from the audience. A lot of people are accustomed to still seeing these pieces in design auctions, so that's where they gravitate towards. But sometimes we feel it's time for those artists to graduate into a contemporary art evening sale, for example.
Can you say a little bit about the criteria that you use to move it into the next category?
Some of the criteria is going to be based on interest from the outside market. So if we know that artist's work has been shown, or the artist is now being shown by a contemporary art gallerist, that is going to influence our decision. Also, some of it is decided by what the value is on the secondary market. If that artist record is still languishing in the under $5,000, under $10,000 range, it is likely to be in a design auction. It's above that, often it'll be in a contemporary art sale. It's a conversation that's still ongoing. That's definitely not an exact science. It requires a lot of massaging and continuing conversation until we get there.
I think
Evan,
a lot of it has to, yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, it's a great question, and it's obviously a difficult question to answer, but it's something that we do talk about a lot internally, but and I think about a lot, and having seen the craft world from the beginning, having grown up in that world myself personally, and watched its sort of highs and lows and the crashes that occurred. Leading up to Objects USA, the original show, there was, like we said, less of a hierarchy. Of course, it did exist, but a lot of these artists were considered artists. They weren't considered potters or ceramicists. They were working in that medium. And over the course of the last 50 years, that has sort of, with Objects USA, a lot of those artists proliferated, or the galleries proliferated, selling craft. And artists became more connected to their material or their medium versus the work itself. And I think that's a trap that a lot of artists fall into, particularly in craft medium, where you become known for one thing and then you just continue making that one thing. That was to the detriment of that movement and to the detriment of that marketplace. And now I think what we have seen is that, as like any good marketplace, there's this sort of work that gets edited. There's an editing that's starting to occur where people are going through the history and finding the people who were maybe breaking those rules, that were standing out, and reinterpreting their work and representing their work. And it comes down to representation. Maybe it's the presentation of the work, the story behind the artists themselves, the personality of the artists themselves. All of these factors make up what turns that sort of around. So there's so many parts to the story that it is really interesting to see that it can occur, and how it works, and who's behind making it happen, because it doesn't happen on its own. It does take a good deal of effort and time to tell and retell those stories, like you said, Meaghan, that you have to explain a lot of things to people. Why is this piece important? It's not like you just get it instantly. And there isn't a secondary market history to back it up. So we're really at the beginning of something, I think, that's exciting. We're just at the start, even though this maybe has been happening for 10 years, let's say. It's really only at the start of where I think this can really go.
Yeah, I've always, I mean, I'm not the only one, I'm sure, but craft medium and the handmade process, sort of, it's a great channel or vessel, metaphorical vessel for identity, in a sense of like really telling a personal story. You spoke of the original Objects USA exhibition having sort of pretty wide representation of men and women, but also different races, and that you tried to do that again with this new show. Do you feel that craft does a better job of representing different identities and different voices than other mediums? And is that contributing perhaps to its sort of rising interest now? More people being interested in like seeing more voices and hearing more personal stories.
I sort of wish that was true. I don't know that it is. I think that, in fact, it's the opposite. And a lot of the craft schools have had a really hard time, bringing people of color from different backgrounds into the fold. I mean, obviously in certain cultures, this is a very, craft is a very important part of culture all over the world. But I think it's something that the universities have to work on a great deal to bring more diversity to their programs and more opportunities to people outside of what they've been doing, because that is certainly not the case in general.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking compared to design schools, which I'm sure are much worse. I mean, it's atrocious what's happening with design schools, but hopefully that's changing as well.
I will say that when we, the exhibition that I worked on with my co-curators, Elizabeth Esther and Lily Kane, on the history of Craft Horizons magazine, we were studying the readership of the magazine and its distribution. There was a lot of interesting statistics that popped up about the coverage being equal among men and women, the coverage of male artists and female artists within craft. There's also a lot of coverage of craft artists of color, indigenous craftspeople. It was sort of more equity in terms of representation in craft than I'd say in art or design at the time. So that was certainly an interesting point for us in our research.
Yeah.
And are you finding collectors particularly appreciate that about the material, or is it more the material itself? The stories behind, or the thing and the materiality of it?
I think it might be both now. I think, as as I said, we're sort of mining these histories and we're pulling things out, new narratives from the canon. So I think it's something that they're appreciating more now. There's still a lot of work to be done, a lot of educational components to take place still. But I think the materiality of the work also is appealing. The audience is always evolving. There's connoisseurship, and there's also this sort of quotient of clients that are from the interior design field. So it's also shopping a look, so this is something that we're contending with as well.
Yeah.
Wava, if I could just add, I think they're in this particular show at Art and Company, with the question about diversity, as we were building these lists, and certainly, when I participated with Evan and Glenn on the contemporary side, we were looking at really all of these makers as artists. And Glenn, so the artists are coming from art schools, craft schools, design schools. It's all mixed together, and what is sort of the uniting factor is this idea that they make objects. So Glenn wrote a really wonderful essay in the catalog. There's a terrific catalog that accompanies the exhibition that Monticelli Press published. And he really emphasizes these kind of neutral words that come up in this show and in the original Objects USA show too, to kind of we refer to the artists as makers here, and that idea of objects. So we didn't kind of go back and mine particular craft schools or craft histories, and hopefully by looking at, for example, Woody's work or others, that you're seeing, someone who really, he's there making art. It's just, he happens to use ceramics.
And then you have someone like Roberto Lugo, who from Philadelphia, who I've been a huge, fan of for years, who's using very traditional pottery, techniques, making mugs and vessels, but doing applications on the surfaces, related to street art, culture, hip hop, graffiti. And this is also something that is taking that traditional form and turning it into something else. It's really nice to see that this is how, and the response to Roberto's work has been phenomenal. Yet it's still incredibly accessible. And I think that's part of his own personal journey that he wants to retain, which I think is fantastic as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of personal stories there. He's also a fun follow on Instagram if you aren't already following him. Well, maybe we have time for one more question. There's not much coming in from the chat that I see. Let me just check one more time. Who are the indigenous artists that you're exhibiting in the show?
In the contemporary show, well, to be honest, we have there's no indigenous artists in the current exhibition. And that was actually quite a struggle to find. So we have way more work to do on that front.
Well, maybe then one final question then is, everyone's talked about all the work that has to be done. So if you could, wave a wand, what would you like to see happen for this market in the next 5-10 years?
And I'd love to see more of a delineation between contemporary art and design in the auction marketplace in terms of how these artists are represented and handled. And for me, the same would go for in the gallery art market sphere, these artists being handled by galleries that aren't really delineating, this is contemporary art, this is design or decorative art. That would be important to me.
There's certainly more a synergy happening with the, there's a lot of, at the moment we have several exhibitions besides our Objects USA exhibition. There's the show that is at the, the show that Glenn, I'm having a complete
Crafting America?
Crafting America, thank you, at Crystal Bridges, which is an incredible exhibition, including a lot of the same artists that are included in Objects USA. And they're also, the Mad Museum is currently exhibiting their permanent collection, which for the first time in decades, they're showing the work from Objects USA that they acquired at the time. I'd like to see more museums concentrating on craft and showing work of this period and collecting work of this period. And I do want to say we have had a big uptick in museum acquisitions throughout this exhibition. We've had lots of great institutions acquire work from this show. So that's a really nice thing to see, and more participation in that regard. This really was looked at as a museum show, even though it was inside of a commercial gallery. And so that's one thing I'd like to see continue.
That's terrific. I agree with both Evan and Meaghan, and certainly to Meaghan's point, that's something that I am just fully stand behind, is trying to erase these hierarchies as much as possible and really look at the works together as art made by artists and with equal value and equal judgment behind them. So I think the work that this show is doing is such a great example of looking back into history and bringing that forward into a contemporary context too. And just, I hope in 50 years when it's revisited again, it's just exploded even further. It's something in the original Objects USA, all the works were classified by material category. And that's something, that's not happening here. It would be impossible to do today, looking at contemporary artists and how they move among media.
Well, wonderful. Maybe just one last thing. Evan, what is the artwork that is behind you?
This is by Gino Marotta. This is an Italian, he's an Italian artist from Rome. This is from 1966. And actually from the collection of Charles Stendig, who was an incredible person who brought Italian radical design to America in the 1960s. It's a neon sculpture, one of 4 that was made. It's mine.
Cool. All right, well, Meaghan, Evan, Abby, thank you so much for your time. The work is so gorgeous, and we're watching this market sure to keep rising. And thank you, everyone, for coming to here.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye. Thanks, Wava. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.